Hello, friends. I come back with an episode today on family businesses. And then what I'm going to talk about is one part of maybe four or five that is on succession planning and management of a business, family business. Let's dive right into it. As we know, some people are born with a silver spoon and they go through life not knowing what stainless steel is. This, I believe, captures what most people think about family businesses and its succession. And I would say they are not wrong. Family members are given jobs to begin with, promotions, and salaries that would never have been achieved by them if their name was not on the door. So let's accept it. And I'm not saying it is unjustified, okay? But people who work there, and I know a friend of mine who works in a family business, and when the younger generation came in, the first thing he said is that, oh, he's the COO of the company. He just joined and he was a fresher. So one of his colleagues asked him, what are you talking about? He's just joined. He's here to take the experience. So he's no, he is the COO. He is the child of the owner. This sums up people's attitude within and outside the organization on family businesses. Family businesses are great, but one of the most critical questions that family businesses face and really at times are at a loss on how to treat it, that challenge is that of the next generation coming into the business. Naturally, these people are clearly different from other employees because they are either current or potential owners of the business. And it's not only their job and their career at stake, but it's the wealth and reputation of the entire family at stake. When it comes to a family business, when anybody joins from the family, and depending on how he or she performs, the entire wealth and reputation of the family is at stake. And therefore, most parents, and I would believe rightfully so, worry about how to take that next generation into the business. There are two ways of looking at it. One is what we call the inherit way. In the sense they come, they have inherited the business straight away. They don't need to prove themselves. They don't need to do anything. And, well, they're there. The other is the merit way, where the newcomer has to work his way through the organization and prove himself, and more importantly, learn the ropes of running the business before he takes a position. Both extremes can be detrimental to the company because if it's the inherent way, more often than not, what happens is that they develop an attitude of entitlement. And when the attitude of entitlement creeps in, they demand services that are not normal within the company. They come at any time they want, leave at any time they want, and they leave at any time they want, and they take extended holidays or holidays whenever they wish. And this is naturally bad for not only the reputation of the company, but also for the morale of the company and its other employees. Whereas if you go the merit way, there is a good chance that you are pitting him against forces where he may not come out very well. But if he's smart enough, he's going to use that to his advantage and learn from those people. As I said in, I think, a talk yesterday itself, learn from others. Yes, so that's what is going to happen. And a lot of entitlement often leads to destruction of the company. In light of this dangers of both the inherit way and the merit way, I think what is really essential, as if everything in life, and I think I've said this a few times already, is balance. Everywhere at the end of the day, it's balance. You know, the merit way especially creates both ways, can create it rift if there's no balance. So if there are two brothers who founded the organization and a generation or two down the line, one arm of the family has more stake but lesser contribution to the business, that also can lead to a breaking up of the business. And if there is too much rivalry between two siblings, even in the second generation, it can lead to a splitting up of the business. And I think one example of this that immediately comes to mind is a company like Reliance, or the company which originally was manufacturing sports equipment, I think, and where the two brothers, the Dassler brothers, if I'm not mistaken, split into, I think, Adidas and Puma. So these are challenges. And this has happened in smaller companies. Let's not look only at the big companies. I can name plenty of smaller companies where people have split up, where both are carrying the names with a minor tweak. One might say it is XYZ, the original, and the other will say XYZ Limited. They are both banking on the same name that was the family name. And this frequently happens when the succession plans are not well thought of, not well crystallized, and not well implemented. So I think for a family business to go on, it is necessary that a lot of thought is actually put into the succession planning and how that succession is going to be implemented. There are times when the stake or the equity comes by way of inheritance. Okay, that is one part of the equity. But what I believe is that for any family business, especially in cases where everybody from the family who owns a stake is not working in the business, it is necessary for that business, very much like a startup, to have a pool of equity which is given on merit, just like startups have a pool of equity for distribution within the employees as bonuses. So at the end of the day, that company will have two kinds of equities held by family members. One is inherited equity, and the other is earned equity. Also, you need to differentiate between equity, compensation, and dividends. What I mean by dividends is share of the profit. Equity, as I've already described, is in two parts: the inherited equity, which is the right of that child, and the earned equity, which is the right of the person who is running the business, and compensation, which needs to be given to the person who's running the business, depending on his position in the business and depending on his contribution to the company. And dividends, because even people who have inherited the stake, at the end of the day, have parked their money and not moving out or asking you to buy over their stake. Okay, so they have parked their money and they deserve a dividend, a return on their investment. So you need to have three kinds of differentiations, and those differentiations will make a great amount of ease of running the business and will continue the business for much longer generations. So having said that, families or individuals within the family business will receive compensation on two cases. First is compensation for the work they put in, and the second is by way of equity or share of profits on what the business generates. That second part will go to anybody who holds equity, either inherited or earned. So naturally, as the value grows, as the business grows, and the person who is really responsible and working for it gets a higher compensation, and at the same time, he gets a higher equity because he is going to get some amount of equity by way of earned equity. So this is an essential part. How to pay the person his compensation for putting in the work that he's doing. I think there are enough parameters available by which any family can decide that based on the industry they are in and what other people within the industry are being compensated with. So that's not a big challenge as I see it, but making sure that that compensation is balanced and equitable with the industry is critical. You cannot have the CEO of your competitor making, say, 5 crores of rupees a year, and your CEO, who is doing a better job than him, who's running a bigger company than him, getting only 1 crore a year. It has to be equitable. So I think you all understand what I'm trying to say. And therefore, that compensation should be justifiable. The family, when they decide this compensation for that person, should be fair enough and should be knowledgeable enough to make sure that this is the. There is never a level of symmetry that goes beyond the first or second generation. Say the first generation has been started by two brothers. Then the two brothers have maybe 3 children. One has 1, the other has 2, who come into the business. Till that level, it is fine. But now look at the third generation. The one who had 1 child, the brother who had 1 child, now has 2 children from his son. And therefore, the number of people who have equity in the business is 4. And especially the 2 who are the current generation have 50% of the business. Whereas the other one who had 2 children, and both of them have, say, 2, so there are 4 people in the business who own 50%. Naturally, this is going to create a challenge because 4 people are working and they get only 50% of the stake. And there are 2 people working who have 50% of the stake. So naturally, the 4 people working in normal circumstances would be contributing more to the company, would be getting more value for the company. And therefore, okay, we are going to say that all 4 of them are getting a compensation vis-a-vis just 2 here. But are we saying, or do we really believe that the compensation you give them balances out the increase in valuation that a company goes through? At the end of the day, it is the valuation of a company that is critical for stakeholders. So if 4 people are contributing versus 2, and the valuation of the company is growing, assuming that all 6 are putting in the same effort, naturally the 4 people contributing have more at stake in the valuation increment than the 2 who have lesser stake. But if they both own 50%, it's going to lead to unhappiness. And this unhappiness can often lead to a split of a company. And that is why I'm suggesting this equitable distribution of equity by way of inherited equity and earned equity. If you are doing that, then the chances of being, okay, I am sure a question comes to mind, is that the pooled equity, what happens? Let us assume that you started the company when the third generation came in, it was decided that, okay, we'll keep a pooled equity of, say, 5%. I'm just throwing numbers. Now that 5% is exhausted by the time the next generation comes. What do you do? Generally, what I would suggest in such cases is that each of the stakeholders contributes a percentage of their equity to the common pool. So you again create a pool. Say at that stage, there are 6 equity holders, immaterial of what stake they are holding. It can be decided that, okay, each equity holder is going to give 1% stake into the pool. At the end of the day, all 6 are going to be affected by the success of the company. And at the same time, that pool is required for the new generation who is going to get some earned equity. And even the previous generation can still continue to get earned equity. So compensation, dividends, profit sharing to be separated is very critical for the successful management and running of a family business. There are families, and this is really not very critical, but just to mention, there are families where they pay the family members slightly more than the market rate so that the family member doesn't think of moving out of the business. Okay? Because he can still keep his equity, but stop working. Okay? Now, in such a case, the company is losing out on a good talent. So some companies do tend to pay a little more than the market rate, which is acceptable. And I don't think family members should really mind that if that person is worth it. Okay. And of course, as I said, it has to be dependent on what that person contributes. If one brother is working as the CFO and the other person is just a salesperson who's fresh, maybe, you can't have the same compensation for both, even though they are family members from the same family, same branch of the family also. So naturally, the compensation is going to be dependent on what you bring to the company. So you have to develop this dividend policy so that it becomes acceptable to the family. And that calls for a family conference. That calls for everybody sitting down together and deciding. It is better to thrash it out once and for all than to have that nagging thought in the mind of everybody working, every family member who's a stakeholder, going through all the time, is this right? Is this wrong? Can we do this? Can we not do this? So it's not the same. It doesn't make sense to keep that kind of ambiguity. So at the end of it, the point in this whole discussion is for this part of the discussion is that you need to differentiate between compensation and dividends or profit sharing on the equity, and that the equity needs to be of 2 kinds, inherited equity and earned equity. Another important point that comes is about decision making. There are people who have just inherited equity, not working with the company. In fact, they might be working somewhere else. But they are stakeholders in the company by way of inheritance or whatever way they have got the equity. And they also have a right and interest in the running of the company. But then, supposing there are 2 family members who are doing the day-to-day business, yes, they're getting compensated. So we're not talking, we've talked about the distribution and the money part of it. Now we are looking at the decision-making part of it. Those 2 brothers are running the business. How are we going to take decisions? When there are just 2 brothers, it's very simple, okay? Because both of them normally would be actively involved in the business and take decisions based on a consensus between the 2 of them, which is relatively easy. So there's not a big challenge in running. And the team, the employees, everybody know this. So they say, okay, we'll ask the owner and we'll get a settlement. And it's an easy settlement because just 2 of them and consensus is easy. But now let's look at the next generation. Say between the 2 brothers, there are 5 siblings, 5 children. Okay, one brother has 2, the other has 3. So now all 5 are in the business and the brothers are still in the business. So you have 7 members who are in the business. naturally decision becomes more difficult. So there needs to be some methodology by which this decision is taken. But now look at another part. Out of the 5 children, only 3 come into the business and the 2 stay out. So the 2 who have stayed out still have equity in the business because they have inherited equity. And 5 decision makers are now taking a call on the business, which also affects the other 2. How is this going to work? Big challenge. And you cannot have a strategy, a system in place where because just one of the family members says no to something, the business can suffer. So things like essential to running the business, like hiring, firing, sales decision, pricing decision, is best left to the people who are running the business. So those 5 people are the ones who are. When it comes to strategic decisions, say about how much of the profit to distribute between people and how much to retain in company for the growth, it's all 7 who should be. In the same way, if the management, the 5 people decide that, okay, we want to do this, we want to take over this company. Of course, they have a good case for doing so, I'm sure, but they need to present that case to the whole family, including the 2 who are not working with the company. And it has to be a family decision. Because at the end of the day, you are going to divert funds from the existing company into a new company, which you will be taking over. And therefore, the other 2 who are not with the company also are going to take some kind of a risk, just like the other 5 are. I'm not saying they are alone taking a risk, but they are going to take a risk, and therefore they need to have a say in that decision. So all of this, what it tells you is that you need to actually divide decision making. You first make a list of all the decisions that one is normally making, and this is best done by the 2 or 5 active members in the business. But then take all those decisions and split them into 3 categories. I think first category naturally is decisions that should be made only by the management, which are things like, as I said, hiring a new manager or a regional manager or a designer or whatever it is, or firing somebody, or on how much credit to give to a customer. They are hands-on in the business. They know best about how to handle this. Yes, the 5 of them should reach some kind of a consensus. Unless within the 5 also they say, okay, this is your department, which is the ideal thing. Okay. One person handles the department, but on major decisions, okay, like when there are 5 people working, you've got a system set up in place which says that, okay, this is what we are going to do as a norm. If something abnormal happens, all 5 get together again. The second decision making should be made by the owners, that is all of them, and which is about how much dividend to pay, how much profit sharing to do, how much money to keep as reserves in the company. And the third decision is where the management makes a recommendation, as I was talking about, say, a takeover. So if somebody wants to take over a company, the 5 management people will present to the whole family. In this case, it's simple. There are only 2 non-distinct, but as the family grows and as the business generations come down, it's going to be more and more people who are involved. So they make a recommendation which the family can turn down or approve. So if they approve, fine. If they reject, yes, there is a discussion. But at the end of the day, the management has to go by what the whole family decides. So there's 3 kind of decisions. And I think every family-owned business needs to define this and be very clear about it. I think one aspect that comes very often, and I also mentioned it just now, is that of the wealth creator. saying that he's going to wonder why he works so hard, why he creates this wealth, and yet gets maybe just his share is 20%. Maybe it's just 20% of the bounty, and the others who are not really involved are taking away 80%. To these people, I will ask one simple question. If those people who are not active in the business but hold equity decide to sell you their equity so that you can run it the way you want and keep all the wealth creation to yourself, how are you going to manage it? I think there are 2 or 3 options. One is you will leverage your company's goodwill as well as assets to take loans from the bank to pay back your siblings, uncles, aunties, whoever else is there to take over their stake. So that is one aspect. But what happens in this case? You are going to be bogged down by a fixed expense, and that could be pretty substantial because interest rates are pretty high. Funds don't come cheap. Expense of interest on the money you have taken. So is it going to be, at the end of the day, something that is more profitable by you? Or is the value you create going away as interest, not to your siblings or anybody, but to the bank? You need to think about this. So that's one of the things. The other is to find some other equity partner. And that other equity partner may not be as kind, as non-interfering as your family members. It's a risk you will take, no matter how well you know the person. Because let's accept it, once people's money is involved, they feel that they need to make sure that everything is going right. Now, even these new equity partners, they could make operations a challenge. And if that happens, what happens to you? You are the wealth creator, but if operations are a challenge, if you're not able to run things the way you think should be run so that the value increases, what is going to happen? That value increase is going to diminish. And you're going to have more and more stress. So think about it like this also. It's everything is not just about me and what you are doing. You have to look at the hidden benefits of what everything is bringing to the table. Your family's equity, they have trust in you. And because you are doing well and giving them good returns, they are not taking their money out and going and parking it elsewhere. They are leaving it with you. You're not paying them an interest. You're paying them a profit share. So if you don't make money, you're not paying them. But with a bank or another equity partner, you might just well have to do that. Whether you make money or not, you have to pay the interest to the bank. So think about it. Think positively. Think with an open mind. You may be the wealth creator, but at the end of the day, there are advantages of having passive partners from the family who are parking their money with you without withdrawing their equity. So I think there are, as I said, there are 2 kinds of contributions. We discussed all this. So to sum it up, what I would say is that first thing, differentiate compensation from dividends and profit sharing. The second thing, have an inherited equity and a merit equity, earned equity. And make sure that compensations are fair and the payout of partnership profits are also fair. Yes, I do not mean to say that give out as dividend everything you earn. No, you need to keep a buffer with this thing. You need to keep reserves with the company. But all that should be a family discussion with active members as well as passive investors. I hope this helps. We are going to talk a lot more about this over the next couple of weeks. I think my notes on succession alone will take at least 3 talks of maybe 20 minutes each. So we are going to work on it, and I'm sure we'll be able to get to a good point. Thank you. Enjoy yourself. Have a great weekend. I will see you again on Monday. Bye.